This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. In fairy tales, witches always wear silly black hats and black cloaks, and they ride on broomsticks. But this is not a fairy tale. This is about real witches. It's The Witches, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. This is it, the spooky season episode. This is our Halloween special, coming on to you a day later than normal because we have lots going on in our real lives. So much. Very busy, but we are here and we're ready to talk about Roald Dahl's The Witches and the 1990 adaptation of The Witches. We have most of our segments. We don't have Guess Who. And we don't have Lost in Adaptation, but we have all the rest of them, so we're going to get right into it with our first segment, which is, as always, Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Luke lives with his grandmother following an accident that killed his parents. His grandmother tells him all about real witches who hate children and will stop at nothing to destroy them. While staying at a hotel in England, Luke stumbles upon an entire convention of witches, led by the Grand High Witch herself, who are planning to turn all the children of England into mice. They catch Luke and turn him into a mouse, but it's because of that he's able to sneak into the Grand High Witch's room and steal the mouse-making potion. Luke doses the witch's soup at dinner, setting off pandemonium in the hotel as all the witches present turn into mice and are killed by the guests and hotel staff. Following their victory, Luke and his grandmother plan to go on a crusade to do the same to even more witches.
Boom, there you go. That's the movie and the book summary in case you haven't watched or read recently. I have plenty of questions, so I'm going to ask them in our next segment. Was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
All right, so I have lots of questions, a fair amount of questions about this movie and the book it is based on, and how much of this movie comes from that book. Based on your Let Me Sum Up, it sounds like quite a bit, but we will discuss it in depth. And my first question is that in the beginning, Luke's grandmother is explaining to him that how to spot witches, and one of the things she tells him is that real witches don't have toes. They just have like stubs and square feet. And I want to know if that's from the book, and then also secondarily, because this is a thing I feel like you might know based on your appreciation for both folklore and witches. Is that from some specific mythology that I'm unaware of? Because I don't think I've ever heard that. And it runs counter, and it was particularly interesting because it runs counter to things like Wizard of Oz, where her shoes, in particular, the shoes in the movie of The Wicked Witch of the West are like very pointy.
Yeah.
And like
and
curly.
It also runs counter to one of the historical ways to spot a witch is extra digits.
There you go.
So it also runs counter to
Yes.
that. It is from the book. I don't think it's from any specific folklore.
Okay.
I couldn't find any evidence of inspiration in folklore or mythology for it. Of course, it could be something fairly obscure.
Right.
I certainly don't have access to tons of sources or the time to really dig around.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking that it could maybe be a nod to George MacDonald's The Princess and the Goblin. The villainous goblins in that novel also have no toes.
Okay.
George MacDonald, for anyone who doesn't recognize the name, he was a Scottish author and a pioneer of modern fantasy literature, published mainly in the mid to late 1800s. I think The Princess and the Goblin is probably his best known work.
The name sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't know if it sounds
I've
familiar.
mentioned it on this show before.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, there is a movie, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
there's
you
an
mentioned
animated
the animated
film.
movie.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
One of my favorite, like, terrifying childhood
Right.
watches.
Okay. I do now that you say that, I do have a memory of of you mentioning The Princess and the Goblin. That's interesting. And yeah, that would make sense. That's an author who I had not heard of, and I would be interested to check some stuff out from, because it's always really interesting to see. And we're going to announce it at the end of this episode, so I'll just do it now. I've been reading Dune, and it's really been interesting to see all of the very clear, and I'm sure he pulled inspiration from a lot of stuff. It's not like Frank Herbert or whatever his name was, the first person to write sci-fi, but so many things are very clearly from Dune, so many things.
It's interesting to kind of look at it backwards.
Yeah, it's been blowing my mind reading Dune and being like, holy cow, like how much of Star Wars comes from Dune. It's wild. So yeah, I would be interested to check that out. All right, next question. We start in the movie after she explains about witches. She tells this story, the grandmother tells this story of this young girl who she was friends with when she was a young girl, named Erica, who who had been warned about witches, or hadn't been warned about witches, and at one point was kidnapped. And then we go through the whole story, and we'll talk more about that. But they she explains the whole story about how she gets trapped in a painting and all this sort of stuff, and we'll talk more about that later. But one of the main things that I thought was interesting is just when we see it in the movie, she's walking down this alley, and Erica straight up gets kidnapped by this woman. She gets
snatched.
grabbed and drug into an alley, and it is a very intense opening scene. And it's not the opening scene, but what's in the first 10 minutes or whatever.
It's one of the first major things that happens.
Yeah, it's a very intense opening moment for your child's movie, and I was wondering if that came from the book, because I was like, holy. And I mean, obviously we've talked about in the prequel, we talked about how this is considered one of the more scarring children's movies and stuff, but usually this is not the thing that's mentioned. But usually it's like the makeup and stuff and all the stuff later in the movie. And so, but this scene of this woman just grabbing this screaming child and dragging her into a dark alley, I was like, holy cow. Does that happen in the book? The story of Erica and all that sort of stuff?
So the novel doesn't start with it, but it is close to the beginning of the book. So it is from the book.
Yeah.
The movie fleshes out that particular story, whereas in the book it's told alongside a couple other stories of additional children who got by witches. And I actually had this in both my movie and my book category, because I really enjoy the movie's kind of honing in its focus on and then expansion of this story. But some of the others in the book are also pretty gnarly. There's a little girl who gets transformed into a chicken, and a little boy who slowly turns to stone, that type of thing.
Yeah, those are all creepy. I definitely think they needed to pick one.
I agree. You pick one and you focus on it
and let us identify and sort of, attach to that character. Makes it more impactful, whereas if we had gotten a bunch, it would feel less impactful. But that's, and I think so it turned into a chicken, boo, who cares? That's too similar to the mouse thing later. So I get skipping that one. The turn into stone one's creepy, but the painting is particularly creepy, and we'll talk more about it later. So as she's telling the story, she's telling Luke she's telling him how to identify witches, but also how they can find him. And one of the things she tells him is that if you don't shower, they won't find you as easy. Because when you're clean, they smell you, but when you're dirty, they smell the dirt. And
it masks the scent of
your
children.
Scent. And I was like, wow, this is chaotic grandmother out here. telling this kid not to shower, and I'm sure the mother is like, gee, thanks. Great. Fantastic. I just got this freaking kid to shower, and now you're out here telling him that witches will eat him if he showers. Thank you. Does that particular little thing come from the book?
Yes. The idea that children shouldn't bathe to hide their scent from witches is directly from the book. It also is the kind of chaotic middle finger to parents that's pretty typical of Dahl.
Yeah. It's funny, though, because it is kind of counter to the traditional I say traditional to like, so in Willy Wonka or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, all of the messages, like all of the lessons that are taught are, at least in the movie, and I assume, I can't recall now, it's been so long, that I think those translate fairly directly from the book, if I'm not
fairly
incorrect. It's funny because all of those lessons that we learn in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory are things that are things like to get the kids to behave better.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, don't eat too much, don't chew gum all the time, you know, don't watch too much TV, don't, you know, that kind of stuff, which is like more like manners type of thing. Like traditional, like getting your kids to behave kind of thing. But then in this one, he's like, don't shower. And I thought that was an interesting sort of twist on compared to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I don't know. I thought it was weird. I will say, so then after that whole story, his parents that evening go out, drive away. They're going on a trip or whatever. And then we sort of get a montage of events of they go out, and then the police show up and knock on the door, and they're carrying the shawl or whatever that the mom had. I don't know exactly what it was, but some sort of cloth that the mom had when they left. And we never get any. And like they come, they're like, hey, can we come in? And then we kind of cut, and then the grandma's like sitting on the couch crying, and Luke comes in, and they like kind of cuddle together or whatever. And it's very apparent to us, you know, as an audience, what has transpired. That being said, I don't know if kids would necessarily. I thought this was like a lot to leave up to kids to figure out, potentially. I could be wrong. It just felt like they were making kids connect more dots than maybe little kids would. I don't know.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
And I don't remember if I picked up on that when I was a kid. Probably I was thinking about other elements of the movie a little bit more. I will say it's far clearer what happened in the book. The little boy who is Luke in the movie, and I'm just going to refer to him as Luke, but he is not named in the book. Mm-hmm. He's just the narrator.
The kid or whatever, yeah.
He was also in the car at the time in the book, but he's obviously survived. Soon after my 7th birthday, my parents took me, as usual, to spend Christmas with my grandmother in Norway. And it was over there, while my father and mother and I were driving in icy weather just north of Oslo, that our car skidded off the road and went tumbling down into a rocky ravine. My parents were killed. I was firmly strapped into the back seat and received only a cut on the forehead.
Okay. So, yeah, very obvious in the book what has transpired. And, I mean, it becomes obvious. And it may even be, and I can't recall, it may even be explicitly stated later on. Like, the grandma may have a conversation with somebody or at some point about his parents dying. I think she might. That rings a bell in my head. But in that particular moment, it was definitely something that's like, this is very good film storytelling where you're not giving too much. But I'm like, but it's for kids, and I don't know, maybe you need to give a little bit more. I don't know, because it is that thing where that people talk about all the times where, you know, you don't have to spell everything out for children. And I agree with that. It's just I felt like maybe this pushed too far in the other direction.
Right. I think there are some more like adult show don't tell elements there. Like, would a kid know that the police were there for? Would they understand that?
And the connection of the blanket to the parents and what that means. And again, because it's never explicit. I don't know. And maybe they would. And I'm not saying they wouldn't. I don't know, because I didn't see this movie as a kid, and I don't know if I would so I can't say whether or not I did.
Well, if you remember, or if you have recently watched this with a current child, let us know.
I would be interested to know if they put that together prior to somebody explicitly saying in the movie, which may have happened at some point. I can't recall. So then we finally meet they now moved to grandmother and Luke moved to the English countryside together for a while. She has a house in the English countryside or whatever. And they moved there, and we get our first encounter with a witch. Luke is playing up in a treehouse, and this witch just walks up off the street. And is trying to tempt him to come down. And she's talking to him, and at one point in the movie, we get this cut to a close-up of her. She's wearing all black, and we cut to this close-up of her, and her eyes all of a sudden are glowing purple, and it's terrifying, like, because it's this very intense close-up. It's like a very, like, stark cut to these glowing purple eyes, and I wanted to know if the glowing purple eyes came from the book, because it was particularly creepy in the movie.
I would call that a modification of something from the book. In the book, it's witches' pupils that are described as subtly changing color.
Okay.
Look carefully at the eyes, because the eyes of a real witch are different from yours and mine. Look in the middle of each eye where there is normally a little black dot. If she is a witch, the black dot will keep changing color, and you will see fire and you will see ice dancing right in the very center of the colored dot. It will send shivers running all over your skin.
Yeah, so yeah, modification. Just maybe a way to make it a little more simple, a little more consistent.
Probably a little more doable.
Yeah, that's what I mean. A little more simple, like
effects,
yeah, that's what I mean. Well, it's not practical. It's definitely a post. They did like a superimposed, like a purple light or something over their eyes. It's definitely done in post. It's not like contacts or anything like that. This particular effect, at least I'm like 99% sure. But yeah, I think it makes it a little more doable. But it's the same idea, and it is whatever that last line you said was. It'll strike fear into your soul or whatever, something like that.
Send shivers running all over your skin,
which it effectively does.
Yeah,
So it's
effectively creepy.
Yes, it was very good in that respect. So then they get we're moving along a little bit, and Luke ends up getting, it's his birthday or something like that. I can't remember if this is before or after his grandmother falls ill. In the film.
Before, I think.
It's right before. She gives him, I think it's a birthday present or some sort of present, and it is 2 white mice as pets that he's very interested in training. And I assume these are going to be important later. Obviously, they do become relevant. Actually, I don't guess they're not particularly important.
They're not particularly important.
But they kind of are in setting up.
It's like
it's like a
foreshadowing.
Yeah, a slight foreshadowing, I guess, would be the right way to describe it. And so I wondered if that element came from the book.
Yes, the mice are in the book. And in the book, they actually never come back into the narrative after Luke is turned into a mouse. So the movie actually does more with them than the book does.
Okay.
It's something I definitely had in better in the movie, because I was glad to know what became of William and Mary, the white
just
mice.
Disappear. They're there.
I mean, either way, I would assume that they lived happily in the hotel, but...
Yeah, you would assume. So then, as we mentioned, the grandmother falls ill. Turns out she has a mild case of diabetes, or potentially maybe it's some sort of magical illness, but it's diagnosed as a mild case of diabetes, and the prescription is something and no sugar, and go take a couple weeks in the English countryside,
by the sea,
which was the prescription for everything. It's a little funny. It's a little bit that prescription in the movie is slightly anachronistic in terms of, like, that's not something they prescribed in the 1980s or wherever this movie takes place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it is something they prescribed all the time in the 1800s or whatever. So it's kind of anachronistic, but it's a little funny. At least I assume maybe England was way behind on the times and they still had doctors out there telling people to go, like, get some of that sea salt air to cure their diabetes or whatever. If so, guys, get it together. But that is what she prescribes. So they go to stay at this hotel. When they arrive at this hotel near the sea, where they're going to stay for an untold amount of time, one of the groups that is also staying at the hotel and, like, using their sort of, convention space or whatever is the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And I wanted to know if that name came from the book, specifically because there's this absolute perverse truth to the reality of groups with names like that being anything but the thing they say they are. Mm-hmm. That is very accurate to reality.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would suspect that is likely part of the point, because it is the same fake name in the book.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's, anytime any organization has the name family.
You don't care about family.
If family in the name, do not care at all. Not even the slightest bit. So we move forward a little bit, and we get to the big convention. They're having their big meeting, the High Witch Council or the Witches Council or whatever in the hotel. They've reserved the big conference room or whatever. And they now that they're all locked in and secure, they can unveil themselves and become their true forms. And the Grand High Witch pulls off her face, her mask, and is revealed in the movie to be this completely crazy looking, hideous, like mosquito person. I don't even know it. It's just like the most terrifying, just ridiculous, grotesque form. And to me, like I said, it kind of reminded me of like a mosquito, like the nose and like the hair,
big pointy nose.
something, I don't know. Very creepy, very terrifying, incredibly good practical makeup effects. And I wanted to know if the description in the book feels like they pulled any inspiration from it in the movie, or if they sort of invented that from whole cloth.
All right. I am literally just going to read about a page and a half from the book. The first thing I noticed about this woman was her size. She was tiny, probably no more than 4 feet and a half tall.
Interesting. Okay, already a divergence from the movie.
A departure from Angelica Huston.
Because Angelica Houston is gigantic.
She's very tall.
Yeah.
She looked quite young. I guessed about 25 or 6, and she was very pretty. She had on a rather stylish long black dress that reached right to the ground, and she wore black gloves that came up to her elbows.
Okay, that's spot on. The dress and the gloves part.
Unlike the others, she wasn't wearing a hat. She didn't look to me like a witch at all, but she couldn't possibly not be one. Otherwise, what on earth was she doing up there on the platform? And why, for heaven's sake, were all the other witches gazing at her with a mixture of adoration, awe, and fear? Very slowly, the young lady on the platform raised her hands to her face. I saw her gloved fingers unhooking something behind her ears, and then she caught hold of her cheeks and lifted her face clean away. The whole of that pretty face came away in her hands. It was a mask. As she took off the mask, she turned sideways and placed it carefully upon a small table nearby. And when she turned round again and faced us, I very nearly screamed out loud. That face of hers was the most frightful and frightening thing I have ever seen. Just looking at it gave me the shakes all over. It was so crumpled and wizened, so shrunken and shriveled, it looked as though it had been pickled in vinegar. It was a fearsome and ghastly sight. There was something terribly wrong with it, something foul and putrid and decayed. It seemed quite literally to be rotting away at the edges, and in the middle of the face, around the mouth and cheeks, I could see the skin all cankered and worm-eaten, as though maggots were working away in there.
Okay, so I would say no, that it doesn't look, that's not remotely what I get from the movie.
I think the movie leans more into some stereotypical witch
the big long
characteristics.
Nose,
the big nose,
the hair, and
the hair wizened, being a very old. I mean, this is also a kind of a very old woman. But
I think the book's version is also sort of stereotypical. It's just different.
Yeah. I think the book leans a little more into like almost describing like a corpse.
To me, what came to my mind when you read that description in the book is if you've ever made or seen like shrunken apples. Yeah. Like when you carve a face into an apple and then you let them dry out and they like shrink and get all gnarly looking. That's kind of what. Or if you like carved a pumpkin that looked like a witch and then let it sit outside for, a month or whatever, and it sort of like started caving in on itself and maybe some worms or something started like eating it or whatever. That's kind of more what I'm imagining, which is not what we get in the movie. And I honestly think, as creepy as the movie's version is, I think the book's version would have been too creepy, too horrifying.
Yeah, the book brings it a little more cartoonish, or the movie does.
Yeah, the movie's a little more like cartoony, over the top, sort of like monstery, whereas the book's version, like you said, would be more corpse-like and like terrifying.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't
Almost
know.
like a zombie.
Yeah, where the movie's version is very scary. It's just a different type of scary that it has like a whimsy funness to it that the book version doesn't seem to have. So then moving on from there, right after that, we have this moment where one of the witches in the crowd, and I can't remember exactly what she somehow second guesses. I don't remember what she even says. Do you recall what this witch in the crowd is arguing about?
Questions, because the witch says she wants them to do away with all of the children in England. And the other witch in the crowd is like, how could we possibly do that? Yeah.
And in the movie, what happens then is that Angelica Houston shoots lasers at her and murders her, and she like melts / explodes or whatever, and like turns into fireworks and turns into a pile of ash on the floor. A very wild scene in the film. Does that happen in the book?
Yes, it does. I think it maybe is a little cheesier in the movie. Maybe not.
I mean, it's a little cheesy. You can tell it's fireworks in the movie.
Like the year that it was made.
I think my biggest issue in the movie was that it's very clearly like they set off like a fountain underneath her chair. It's like, okay, that's fireworks. Like, I think it would work for a kid, but compared to some of the other effects in the movie that are super like gnarly and wild, this one's a little like, you didn't try as hard on that one. I don't know.
So here's what happens in the book. A moment later, a stream of sparks that looked like tiny white-hot metal filings came shooting out of the Grand High Witch's eyes and flew straight towards the one who had dared to speak. I saw the sparks striking against her and burrowing into her, and she screamed a horrible howling scream, and a puff of smoke rose up around her. A smell of burning meat filled the room.
So yeah, same thing, basically. Yeah, pretty much identical. So then after that moment, Bruno shows up. Bruno is another boy who we've met in the hotel, who's there with some very rich parents. He likes his food. He's our Augustus Gloop stand-in in this movie. It's basically could just be Augustus Gloop in like terms of the characterization. But he's brought in. He's been captured by the witches. Because he was looking, they lied to him and said there would be food or something, so he showed up and they bring him in, and as they're bringing him to the stage, Angelica Houston in this moment, the acting choice that was made by her or the director or whoever was very interesting. She becomes sort of like hot and bothered by them bringing Bruno up there, and like I get what the movie's going for, I think, but it feels weird, and I needed to know if that sort of, because she's writhing in a way that is suggestive of
sexual arousal,
and not like just excitement. It's beyond excitement to like a sensual arousal type of thing, and it feels very strange, and it doesn't necessarily feel intentional because it's never. I don't want to say it's not intentional. It's obviously intentional because it's so obvious. But like it's never. There's no other comment. Nothing else with that ever happens. Like there's never another moment.
Yeah, there's no other commentary on that.
And there's no other moment where she acts like that. It's just this one moment. And I was like, it's very strange. And I wanted to know if it came from the book or if that.
That is not how it reads in the book. I agree. It's quite the choice. And yeah, I think I know what the movie is trying to do there, but it is like, it's an uncomfortable moment. Maybe that's the point.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be intentionally uncomfortable, but I don't know. It doesn't read in a way that means anything. Like I said, because nothing ever. There doesn't ever seem to be any other commentary. This isn't like a weird pedophilic thing. Like ultimately, you know what I mean? Like that's not like the ultimate sort of message we're supposed to get out of that is some sort of weird like pedophilia idea. I don't know. So that has nothing to do with it. It's just literally like this one moment, and I get it. Like because it is such a evocative movement, it creates this emotional reaction in the audience, but it does feel weird, and I don't know. It just felt a little strange. So then after they transform Bruno into a mouse and he runs off, and then Luke is now trapped in the room and he's trying to get away, but they smell him at the last moment and they're looking for him, and then they end up seeing him, but he's trying to run. He running through legs and blah blah blah, and he finally gets out of the hall that they're in. And he's running through all these places to get away from them. And he turns into James Bond for a minute in the movie. It turns into a parkour. I mean, just for a moment, he goes out. He runs out of this room into the restaurant area or something. I don't know where he is. It's like a banquet hall or something. And they're chasing him, and he literally dives under a table, gets up and flips the table over to block the way. And then he runs over to this big, set of glass doors that lead out to the veranda or whatever. And he grabs a chair from the table and throws it through the window. And I was like, this little 8-year-old turns into a superhero all of a sudden. And it was very hilarious to me because it did not remotely fit within. It felt like such adult thinking and reaction to this type of scenario where as a little kid I would imagine would just run, just run and just keep running, and you know what I mean? I like that sort of problem solving and I don't know, it just felt very unrealistic for a child of his age. I'm not saying it is, but it felt unrealistic to me. And it made me laugh a lot because I was like, oh, he's like 007. They messed with the wrong kid. I thought that was going to be he's going to go and he's going to go. He's pull out a butter knife and he's going to start stabbing. He's going to start doing
he has a particular
he's like
set
Jason
of skills.
Bourne. Yeah, he just turns into Jason Bourne. He's grabbing books off things and hitting them in the throat with books and shoving butter knives through their temples and stuff. I was like, holy cow, that would have been a whole different but amazing movie. I wanted to know if any of that chase scene like that happens in the book or if that was from the movie only.
So I will talk more about this in a later segment, but he does not momentarily get away from them in the book.
Oh, okay.
So none of that is from the book.
Okay. I mean, they do capture him relatively quickly after this in the movie. It's not like he gets away for that long. Because immediately after this, he gets outside, and then I don't remember how it transpires, but they do capture him immediately.
Yeah,
it's just a momentary chase.
He only gets away for a few minutes.
Yeah, but he is ultimately captured, and they do grab him and dump the Solution 86 or whatever.
Formula
86, which is a play on words for 86ing somebody, which is killing somebody.
Yeah,
and which I don't know where that comes from actually. I assume it's probably some weird police code or something, but who knows? Yeah, so he gets force-fed the mouse stuff, and he turns into a mouse. And then the movie from here on out becomes a fun Stuart Little adventure. It's just Bruno and Luke going on a sweet adventure as mice. And I thought that was really fun, and I want to know if that I figured it was because it feels like the meat of the movie. This is honestly when the movie became really fun to me, was once he becomes a mouse, I was like, okay, I'm into this. This is cool. Because I like all the, when they go down under stuff and it's all these miniatures and then giant, clearly larger sets of smaller worlds. All that sort of stuff is really cool and interesting to me. And the way they mix the practical effects of puppets and stuff with actual mice, all of that I thought was really neat. And so I really enjoyed this whole segment where he is a mouse and him and Bruno are running around. I thought was cool. And I wanted to know if him and Bruno going on mouse adventures together comes from the book.
It depends on what part exactly you're referring to. There is not a long sequence of them trying to get to the grandmother's room.
Okay.
In the book. Because they do spend quite a bit of time
I think that's mainly at this moment what I was talking about, but yeah.
But then Luke does go into the Grand High Witch's room to get Formula 86, and then later he does venture into the kitchen to dump it into the soup.
Okay. So yeah, we get a lot in the book. You get a fair amount of him going on little mouse adventures, little mousy adventures.
I have an answer on 86, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Slang for eliminate, as early as 1936, originated at lunch counters. A cook's word for none when asked for something not available, probably rhyming slang for nix.
Oh, okay. Nix 86. I guess that makes sense. Huh. I'd be interested to know if that's actually the case, or because it, said probably from, which I know most etymology stuff
Yeah.
generally says probably from,
Yeah.
but
We think this is
Yeah.
what happened here, basically.
So now at this point, like as you said, they steal the potion, the 86 from they meet up with the grandma. The grandma takes them, and they realize they got to get the potion so that they can put it in. There's going to be a banquet later where all the witches are going to be eating. They're going to put the potion in the soup that they're eating, and then they can all turn into mice. And we get into the kitchen, and there's a witch working in the kitchen, is the one actually making the soup. And Bruno gets the potion or whatever, and he dumps it into the soup, the cress soup, which is watercress soup. I had to look. I've never heard of cress soup. It's just
It
made
doesn't
from watercress.
sound good.
It's basically just like a puree of like watercress with other stuff, which is essentially just like like watercress is similar to like celery or like
Yeah,
green.
it sounds
It's
like a very mild flavored soup.
I believe it is. It is. It's why it's a first course. It's a palate.
All right, I guess.
That sort of thing. I would be my guess.
I'm not
I don't,
fancy. I don't eat in courses.
Yeah, I don't eat. Yeah, cress soup is definitely one of those fancier soups, but it's one of those ones where it's like very few ingredients. It's just like watercress, onion. It's probably like watercress and mirepoix and like some stock or something.
Yeah,
and that's
salt and pepper.
Yeah, and probably white pepper, honestly, because they wouldn't want the black pepper in there to. You don't put black pepper. You don't put black
mar
pepper
the whole thing.
in white sauces in French cuisine because it ruins the look of the whole thing. I'm probably wrong about that, but a lot of times you don't use black pepper in certain sauces in French cuisine. So they, anyways, he gets the potion in there, and then the witch who's working in the kitchen making the soup, she tastes it, and she then transforms into a mouse. And she realizes, oh no, the soup is dosed with the stuff, and they're getting ready to take it out to serve everybody, all the witches, and she runs out as a mouse to try to warn them. And I guess they can't hear her. I don't know, because we can hear her just fine, but I assume the idea is that they can't hear her. And as she runs up to the table where the Grand High Witch is, the Grand High Witch just stomps on her, and she explodes into green goo.
Yeah,
And I guess that's what the witches are full of.
I guess.
Is green goo. Does that happen in the book? Does that witch get stomped on and just green goo go everywhere?
There is no chef witch in the book.
Okay.
There are no witches working at the hotel at all, because we do see another witch hotel employee.
Yeah.
Earlier.
Also, she's like one of the not the concierge, but something like that.
Yeah.
She's like when they go into the big hall where they're having their meeting, she's like helping them.
Yeah.
She's like the assistant for that room, and she like locks the doors and stuff. Yeah.
So there are no witches working at the hotel in the book, but that was a change that I liked because witches are supposedly everywhere.
According to the grandma.
And I liked that the movie showed that.
But yeah, so not no stomped. Well, at any point do we see
mouse?
Okay.
Witch mouse?
We don't see that at all.
No.
Okay.
No green goo.
No green goo. So then they do all eat the soup, the cress soup. In the book, I don't even know. Does that happen in the movie? Or sorry, in the movie, they all eat the soup and they all turn into rats.
He
And
does.
based
He
on your
does put it in the
description-
soup. I don't remember if it was cress soup or not.
Okay, that's not important, but that does happen. And then all the witches turn into mice.
Yes.
Okay, and then I want to know specifically because they all turn into mice, but the Grand High Witch specifically turns into this nightmare rat thing that is vaguely reminiscent of her giant, terrifying mosquito person form in its like nose shape and stuff. And I wanted to know if the Grand High Witch turned into a particularly grotesque rat mouse thing, or if she just kind of turns into a generic mouse in the book.
Unfortunately, there is no description of the Grand High Witch mouse.
Boo.
So we don't know, but I like the idea that she would turn into this particularly grotesque like rat.
Yeah.
Because partly, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it also plays on the idea of like the Rat King from like the Nutcracker and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. What doesn't make perfect sense is what happens after that is Mr. Bean shows up. He's like
he's the hotel manager.
Or whatever. And he shows up and things have hit, it's hit the fan at this point, and there's mice everywhere and they're like going crazy, murdering all the mice. And he discovers the grandma traps the Grand High Witch under like a glass cloche or whatever. I think it's actually like a pitcher or something. And then Mr. Bean, she like points it out to Mr. Bean, and he runs over with his giant meat cleaver. And in the movie, he like pulls the glass thing off, and then he hits the rat with the cleaver, and it like nothing happens, but it also like we hear like a almost like a balloon like like, and I think the implication is, but we don't see her die. I don't know. I feel like what happened was something more grotesque happened in the original edit, but they were like, this is too much.
It's too much.
And so they like
maybe that was one of the edited scenes.
Yeah, and so that like hastily edited a weird sort of trimmed down version.
She does die off screen.
Yeah, we assume, but we don't really see it. And like when he hits her with the knife, like nothing happens.
I think some of the green goo, like,
maybe a little green goo
him.
squirts out, and because he rubs it off his face, but it's not like a bunch, like it's a little tiny. I don't know. It just the whole thing felt like, to me, it felt like a scene that was severely like hack jobbed,
reworked.
In the editing room, which wouldn't surprise me because maybe it was much more like you said intense, and then it just.
I mean, that was one of the fun facts about this movie was that there was a scarier edit.
Yeah. And so that wouldn't surprise me if that was one of the scenes. It just, I don't know, the way it's cut in the movie, I found that to be like confusing and not satisfying as an ending to that whole to the Grand High Witch. And I wanted to know if that is what happens in the book, or if not, what does happen to the Grand High Witch in the book.
None of that specifically is from the book. I don't think we know like specifically what happened to the Grand High Witch. We just know that all of the mice were then killed at the hotel.
Okay, so they were exterminated, but we don't get like a blow by blow.
Right, no, we don't get like a play-by-play or anything.
All right, fantastic. So then they've defeated all the witches in the hotel. They return home, and we'll get this is my first note, because in this moment this is how it seemed to be ending, and then we'll talk about how it actually ends. But this is my question: is does Luke just stay a mouse and then somehow steal a bunch of money from the Grand High Witch's hotel? So I have multi-layered issues with the ending of this movie. And the first was, I was like, oh, he just stays a mouse. That's fun. And then they like make plans to go, and we'll talk about that in a second. They make plans to go murder the witches in America. But he's going to stay a mouse, but he saw that she had a bunch of money, and the money is explained. Like they had all this money so that they could use it to get all the kids, and they're going to open like candy shops. And open them, and then put the mouse stuff in the candy, and that's how they're going to turn all the kids into mice. Fine. And so he saw this money. Great. I do not possibly fathom how that translates to him being able to get that money from her hotel room to them. That makes zero sense. So I want to know if that happens in the book.
I don't know how Luke would manage to swing that, and I don't think the movie did either, because it is not explained at all. There's something similar-ish in the book. In the book, the grandmother calls the police in England and like impersonates a police chief from Norway. And
because she is like well, she's Swedish in the movie, I think, but yes.
She's and like tells them that she's interested in the case, and then they buy it, and she manages to get like the home address of the Grand High Witch.
Okay.
Which leads me to your next question here.
But before we get to that, so there's no money.
No, they don't get any money.
That makes no sense.
No, I don't
absolutely
know. That's
stupid.
why there's no explanation for it in the movie. We just hand wave it.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, I found this money. I saw this money in the room. Okay, but you're a mouse.
How did you end up with it?
Get it here? How did you get them to deliver it? None of that. Whatever. And again, it's a kids movie, but still, like, it's just completely hand waved away. But then in the movie, they're talking about how they discover they find like her diary or something. Yeah. They have like some book of hers that has all these addresses of witches in America. So they plan their witch hunting spree in America. And that seemed how the movie was going to end in that moment was, and you're gonna stay a mouse, and we're gonna go hunting witches in America at the end. Mm-hmm. Does the witch hunting spree, is that from the book?
Yes.
Yeah, because you said it leads from. Yeah.
So they get her address in the book, And then they discover that that address is basically like the witch headquarters.
Right.
And it just so happens to be located in Norway, where they are. So they hatch a plan to turn all of the witches that are in the headquarters into mice and do away with them. And then their plan is, they're like, well, surely once we get into the headquarters, there'll be information for us to trace even more witches, and we can take this
Murder
thing
all the
worldwide.
witches. Witch Hunters International. That's fun. Okay. So yeah, that makes sense. So before we get to the surprise twist ending, which I feel like was tacked on at the very, this has got to be the thing that most of this,
I understand why Roald Dahl didn't like the
most
end
of this
this
ending has to be what Roald Dahl was like. What the heck?
Yeah.
Because none of it makes sense. But one little detail before we get to the other like surprise twist ending of the movie is we see Luke as a mouse. He has all these toys, and we saw them a little bit in the beginning. He has like Legos and, erector sets or whatever, all these different toys. But in the end of the movie, we see him, he's coming to bed, and he gets in this like Rube Goldberg device of toys that like, he's like a train that like, transports him over to this building. Then he gets in a thing that like raises him up and blah, blah, blah. It's very fun. The kind of thing that me as a kid would like love. I love Rube Goldberg devices, and toys like that are like were super fascinating to me as a kid. Could never make them because I was not smart enough, but I was always fascinated by toys like that. And those kind of contraptions, like at the beginning of, is it Back to the Future? Yeah, like the device in Back to the Future where he like feeds the dog or Einstein or whatever. Anyways, all those kind of things I always loved. Is that the whole toy contraption-y transportation type of stuff come from the book?
I think the movie expanded on it a little bit. They do mention that they kind of rig up the grandmother's house with like tiny ladders and things like that. I don't think it's mentioned that they use like literal toys.
Right. But there's some allusion to them doing some sort of micro construction for Luke to get around as a mouse. And then wait, surprise! The assistant of the Grand High Witch, who they were mean to, the Grand High Witch was mean to earlier, shows up and decides to turn Luke back into a real boy, and he turns into a real boy and explodes out of his Lego castle, and worried we see his penis at one point.
I'm also concerned that we saw his penis at one point.
I could be wrong, but he explodes out of that thing and flies through the air, and I was like, why? What? That felt like we saw too much there. You could have left more to the imagination. I don't know. I just was weird. And I wanted to know if that whole thing, and then as she's leaving, Luke calls out the window, "Don't forget about Bruno." I was like, oh, screw you. Like, all of that was stupid. And here's the thing. We'll talk about it. I wanted to know if this happens in the book because I was really disappointed because there's a moment before this. And it felt so tacked on in the movie because there's a line in the movie where Luke as a mouse is like, I actually like being a mouse. This is pretty great. And this ties in to one of the things we talked in the prequel, more specifically Bruno's whole storyline with the mouse. Tied into a thing we talked about in the prequel of critics. One critic, a modern appraisal of it as like a trans allegory or whatever, like them transforming into mice and like the parents accepting it and not accepting it, like all that sort of stuff. And we can talk about that more, whatever. But I actually really liked when he turns into a mouse and he's like, yeah, this is not so bad. I like being a mouse. It's pretty cool. And then the movie's like, nope. Yoink, you're a boy again. And I all of that. And then the super tacked on, don't forget about, like, screw that. All of that. Terrible, bad, garbage. Does it come from the book? I assume not.
None of that happens in the book. There is no good witch assistant, and Luke does stay a mouse. Which would have been fine.
Yes.
Like, that would have been a fine way to end the movie.
That's how it should have ended.
He was like, this isn't so bad. I like being a mouse. I don't have to go to school and blah, blah, blah. I'm not really sure. I feel like it had to have been studio notes. It had to be
studio notes. There's no way it wasn't studio notes.
There was some exec who was like,
well, but he stays a mouse?
He stays a mouse. What? I don't get it.
Why does it stays? But
that's not a happy ending.
Yeah. What? No, he's got to turn him. Somebody's got to turn him back into a boy. Yeah.
Like, conceptually, I like the idea of like not knowing what the witch assistant was gonna do as she goes up to the house, because they played a little ominous.
Yes, they played vague. Yeah, you might not. She
Like,
might be there for revenge
yeah,
or something.
like conceptually, I like that idea, but I don't think any of it works narratively. It felt very Deus Ex Machina. Plus, then the added idea at the end that she's now becoming like beautiful / normal after using her powers for good is a message that doesn't quite sit well with me.
Everything about the ending of this movie is terrible.
Yeah,
it's super
it's pretty
stupid.
bad.
It's so dumb. Like not everything. I like the toy thing. I like all of the parts that, like I said, like her showing up to transform into a boy, dumb. The money thing, dumb. Like all the traditional, like clearly shoehorned in studio happy ending notes are all terrible.
Yeah, they're all bad.
Anything that seems not like it was the original version that wasn't shoehorned in by a studio or whatever felt like fine. Like, I like being a mouse. Oh, we're back home. We're fine. Oh, this fun toys. Oh, we're going on a witch hunting spree. That felt a little weird. Whatever. Like, witch genocide feels like, I don't know, maybe a drastic step. Maybe not. I mean, who knows? That's a whole other discussion for another day. But everything else about that, I was like, yeah, this ending's great. Great ending. I like, he's a mouse. They're happy still. The whole point is it doesn't matter, like what you look like, who you are doesn't really matter. Not who you are, but like what you look like and what like your physical
your physical ability
or whatever doesn't really matter. It's about like your spirit and your brain and that sort of stuff. Like, fine, great ending. And yeah, and if they had kept that ending, I think it actually kind of does work as like a vaguely like trans outlet. Maybe. I mean, it's vague and it's not, we've talked about it in the prequel. It's not like, I don't know how much kids would be able to identify with. Maybe. I don't know.
Notes on that later.
Maybe they would. I don't know. I can't say it would or wouldn't. I'm just saying I think it works a little bit if they leave, the kid as a mouse, the kids as mice. If him and Bruno stay as mice, then I can see it working.
Yeah, because they're mice, but they're still Luke and Bruno.
Yeah, and they
ultimate message.
Yeah, and they like themselves as their new selves. As their new versions of themselves. So yeah. This is a terrible ending. It's terrible. It's so bad. I hated it. All right, those are all my questions. I don't have a lot in adaptation because it was all pretty straightforward. But Katie does have some things that she thought were better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
All my segments are fairly short because we managed to cover a lot of what I had in your questions, which is great. But I do have a few things under better in the book. There is one moment when Luke is trapped in the convention room with the witches. And I don't think there would be a way to do it in the movie without a voiceover, but he's trapped in there and he's like frantically trying to remember when the last time he had a bath was.
Oh, yeah.
And if he might be dirty enough to get out of this situation that he's in.
I think I have a good way to do it. And maybe they did this and I just missed it, but I think I have a good subtle way to do it is he just sniffs his armpit.
Sniffing himself? Yeah, that could work.
Just like a little moment where they're like, and maybe he actually might do that when one of them goes, I smell dog poop or whatever.
Yeah, he
might like smell himself. I don't know, but I think that would be the way to do it. But I that is a fun little detail in the book.
Also, during that convention scene, the Grand High Witch relays the recipe for Formula 86. And I think it probably would have gone on too long in the movie, to be fair. But it is an incredibly doll-esque scene. It's she's naming all of these ingredients from like kooky made-up creatures and like detailing like where you find them and how you catch them. And it's very like I said, like very doll-esque.
Yeah.
Like very typical of his writing.
Right.
As much as I enjoy the scene where the Grand High Witch pushes the baby down the cliffside,
great scene,
which wrecked me as a kid, as much as I enjoy that scene, I'm not sure it makes sense narratively to have him get away and run around and then get caught. I just feel like we end up right back in the ballroom and right back on track with the book. So I'm not sure what the point was.
The point was an action beat. Some fun adventure.
I guess.
Let him turn into James Bond for a minute. Like that's the whole reason for that, is just to give us, because otherwise we don't get, I'm not saying I'm not saying I necessarily agree, but I can see the reasoning behind, let's put, there's not a whole lot of action, fun adventure in this movie. Let's give a 5-minute scene where we have a chase scene where he's running from the witches. It doesn't really affect the narrative in any way.
Yeah.
We can add a fun scene where we see her throw a baby down a cliff. Like, that's fun. Like, all of that's fun, and it doesn't, like, I think that's one of those changes that while not necessary, doesn't negatively affect the story in any way, or you know what I mean? Like, and kind of just adds some. So I get it. I think I get why it's there.
I get why. I just think it's a little messy.
All right.
When Luke gets into the Grand High Witch's hotel room, there's not a cat in the book. She has a cat in the movie.
Yes.
There's no cat.
Who I can't remember. What's the cat's name? It's got a fun name.
Liebchen.
Liebchen. That's right.
But what he does come across in the book are some frogs under her bed who are children who have been turned into frogs.
Ugh.
And there's this whole aside where he's thinking about how, because he's been turned into a mouse,
Yeah.
he's very quick and small, and he can like skitter around and get away and hide under things and behind things and go into small spaces. And he's like, but frogs can't do that. All they can do is hop kind of
True. Slowly hop.
So all they really have no choice but to just like sit there and wait for whatever the Grand High Witch is going to do to them.
Yeah, that's gnarly.
Yeah.
Terrifying. Yeah, it's true. Being a mouse would be much preferable.
Yes, would much rather be a mouse.
Yeah.
And my last note here is about the Jenkins, Bruno's parents. In the movie, we see them eventually come to accept Bruno.
Yeah.
We are to assume.
Yeah.
They're upset at first, and then the dad's like, "That's our son. That's Bruno." And that is not what happens in the book. We never see them like reconcile with it in any way. And the grandmother even says later that she wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Jenkins just killed Bruno rather than deal with the issue.
Yeah.
And I think that is a more meaningful way to look at that, to put something up that is in contrast to Luke's situation
With his grandma.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair, because I and we'll talk more about it later. I do think I didn't mind that version, or like what happens with the Jenkins in the movie. But I do think you're right, that I think, because that's a thing I remember we specifically talked about in what's the Simon movie?
Oh, Love, Simon.
Love, Simon, about sort of it being a very clean, sort of whitewashed like coming out story. And we'll talk more about this specifically later. But I do think it would have been interesting, because we do have these sort of like accepting, version with Bruno's grandmother. I think seeing the the opposite of that, and that sort of, and following through with that might have been a more poignant message potentially.
And I have a lot of thoughts on the messaging in both the book and the movie in my final verdict as well.
All right. Katie's got a few things now to talk about that she thought was better in the movie. Were better in the movie, plural. It's multiple things. Were better.
Yes, there are multiple things.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
The first one being that in the book, there's this kind of long explanation of that Luke and his grandmother are going to stay in Norway, but then it's stipulated in his parents' will that they want him to go to school in England. And there's this whole like to-do about it, kind of, and I thought it was a good choice to just skip over all of that and just have them move back to England. Like, just send them there. It's fine. We just need them to be in England.
Yeah. I blacked out over what you were talking about with the nonsense, so I agree. Because I was like, I don't care. That seems irrelevant.
Yeah. I liked the little moment in the hotel where the Grand High Witch walks up to a painting with a child in it and like taps on it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
As
indicating that they have
another little nod to the treachery and the devilry.
Yep.
In the book, we meet Bruno when he comes into the convention hall with all of the witches in it. That's the first time we see Bruno.
No, it's not.
In the book, yes, it is.
Oh, in the book.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you meant. Sorry. Yes, sure. I'll take your word for it. I thought you were talking about in the movie. I was like, no, it's not. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. In the book, that is the first time we see him. And Luke like thinks to himself like, oh, I've seen him around the hotel and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But I thought it was a good idea to actually have the audience meet Bruno prior to that scene.
Yeah.
I thought that there being a cat in the witch's room was an interesting little snag, although I am generally not a fan of black cat defamation.
I agree. To be fair, the cat didn't seem evil necessarily, just saw mice, wanted to eat mice.
Fair enough.
Like, the cat wasn't particularly evil, and it was... I liked that it was just sort of distracted by a toy, like a dumb cat. And I also liked that it got bored with the toy, like, immediately. It was like, meh.
Just like a cat.
Just like a cat. I also liked that they didn't, like, murder the cat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The cat
like,
was presumably fine.
Yeah, seemingly fine. Just, it's just a cat being a cat. So I don't disagree, but also at the same time, I was like, better treatment of the cat than I would have thought overall.
I liked that there was a spare face mask in the witch's room. That was a detail that was not from the book. Oh, yeah, it's like
hanging in her...
Yeah, he like opens a case and there's a face hanging there.
Yeah.
The Grand High Witch and the grandmother knowing each other is not from the book, but I thought that both made sense.
Yeah.
And added some extra drama.
Do we ever get clarification of how they know each other?
It's implied in both the book and the movie that the grandmother at one time was like a witch hunter.
Oh, I missed that in the movie.
It is implied.
Okay.
Like I said, it's not something that's outright stated.
I mean, it makes sense because she was friends with Erica, obviously, in the beginning. Like, she's the little girl, whatever her name is. Right, she was the little girl that was friends with Erica.
Yeah.
Because she shows up at the house the one day after. Yeah,
and she's missing a finger in both the book and the movie, which is
and that's
is
from
also,
a run-in with witches.
Yeah, implied that is from a run-in with witches.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I didn't notice if they ever explained, because you obviously she's like, I recognize her, and like they seem to recognize each other, like, but we never. And I thought that was interesting, but I didn't get that she was a witch hunter. I guess I never gathered that was the implication they were going for.
I also liked giving Bruno a brief heroic moment at the end when the Grand High Witch is turning into a mouse, but she's about to like attack the grandmother, and Bruno jumps on her and distracts her long enough that she can't hurt the grandmother before she starts turning into a mouse. Yeah. So I thought that was nice. Give Bruno a nice little moment there.
A nice mouse moment. All right, we got a few things that the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
Most of what grandmother says about witches is spot on from the book. I think the only specific thing that is missing in the movie is that witches have blue spit.
Gross.
Yeah, pretty gross. I imagine they didn't want to deal with that. So.
Gross or hot, depending on your particular
Fair enough.
thing, which you do you.
The witch who corners Luke in the treehouse and tries to tempt him down with a snake is all from the book. But I did like how in the book, Luke just like stays up in the tree. He like shoots up higher into the tree and stays there until it gets dark because he can no longer see if she's gone or not. Yeah. And like just keeps yelling for his grandma until she finally comes out. Yeah. The grandmother does say that she saw rats in the hotel after the manager tries to go after Luke's pet mice.
Yeah, she like blackmails the...
Yeah.
Not even blackmails. She like, what is it? What is blackmailing when you don't have actual blackmail? Like, just lying?
I mean,
like,
yeah,
I don't know.
I guess
There's a
just
word.
lying.
I feel like there's a word for it. She like gaslights him, kind of. I don't know. That's probably not the right. But like, you know what I mean? Like
She has kind of a Karen moment.
Yeah, where she's like, "Oh, we'll just tell him we saw rats and you'll be out of business or whatever." And he's like, "What?" You know, but you know, yeah, it's like blackmailing, but there's no actual blackmail. I don't know. I'm sure there's a term for it.
Yeah,
Surely there's a term.
There is. The grandmother lowering Luke down in a sock onto the Grand High Witch's balcony.
Yeah, adorable.
A sock that she was knitting.
Does she then distract? No, there's no cat.
No, there's
Never
no cat.
mind. Sorry.
So
Yep,
no.
yep. That's a fun. That is a very fun extension from by adding the cat.
True.
Since the sock was something already in the book.
Yes.
Then using that to distract the cat is a very fun little connection there. I think that's
I
clever.
agree. And Luke does get the tip of his tail chopped off.
Oh yeah, the chef is like,
when he's on his kitchen adventure.
Yeah, they swing in. One of the chefs tries to kill him with a cleaver and chops the end of his tail off. Yep. All right, we got a few odds and ends before we get to the final verdict.
My very first note that I wrote down when we started watching this was, boy, these opening credits are making me motion sick.
I was working on my notes, so I missed most of them, but we are just like flying over like
it was like a
landscapes,
very
right?
long sequence of like shaky cam flying very fast over snowy mountains.
Yes.
And I was like, bleh.
Yeah. I really enjoyed, so we talked a little bit earlier about the scene where we get the whole story of Erica and her getting trapped in the painting, and there's this moment where the father finally realizes that she's trapped in the painting, and in the movie he sees her, and the look on his face, we see him see her at first, and then we cut to like a first person view, like a point of view shot, and we like push into the painting, and like whatever the grandma's name is, as a young girl is there, and then the mother is standing there, and the camera like pushes past them, and they're both staring at the camera like, what are you like? And just that whole shot is very creepy, and then pushing into that painting and the little girl in the painting, all of that, incredibly terrifying. And I was like, in this moment, it makes sense that they got Nicholas Roeg if you're gonna make this creepy ass movie.
Yeah.
Like, you know, he can do creepy movies based on our last movie.
I want to just touch on real quick the mild case of diabetes. Can you have a mild case of I feel like you either have diabetes or you don't.
I believe you do have diabetes or you don't, but I think you can have a mild case in the sense that like you can require different, because I mean, like with our cat has diabetes, and it was a matter of like how much insulin does he need, you know, I think you can have varying, and you can get to a point where you essentially don't have diabetes anymore, so you can be like pre-diabetic and stuff. Like I think there's maybe, you know, I don't know, I don't think you can have like, you either have diabetes or you don't, but I think there is like varying degrees to which the diabetes can be serious.
Never
I
heard
guess
anyone refer to it as a mild case.
I
of
agree that I've
diabetes.
never heard that, but
She has pneumonia in the book, so
yeah. I do think Luke, the casting for Luke, and this kid was not in very many things, but his casting in this movie, he's a great wide-eyed dumb kid.
Yeah.
Like he does the like wide-eyed, like deer in the headlights, kind of naive, precious dumb kid.
He's like a knockoff Jonathan Lipnicki.
Yes.
Or even like a Macaulay Culkin.
A little bit,
knockoff,
yeah. A little bit, yeah. But before them. Both of them, yeah.
Yeah,
because I mean, it was 1990.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
I mean,
so I guess
Home
they're
Alone
the
was 94 or whatever. Yeah.
Whoever this kid is, I don't think I've ever seen him in anything else.
I could not get over how much Bruno Jenkins sounds like Ron Weasley.
He really does.
Rupert Grint, I guess,
in that
specifically.
first scene
Yes, that
where
first
we
scene
meet him,
where he's eating. He sounds like.
I was looking down at my computer and he started talking, and I was like,
yeah. He sounds exactly like Ron Weasley. It's wild. That's wizard's chess. Like I was expecting him to yell, "That's wizard's chess" or something. It was wild how much he sounds like him. They must be from the same part of England or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they must be from the same like
similar
Hamlet
accent.
or whatever.
So we talked about in the prequel, one of your fun facts was that in the witch convention scene,
Yes.
a lot of the witches were actually men in wigs.
Yes.
And we both kind of had like a visceral reaction to that. But it occurred to me a couple of days after we recorded the prequel that might have been at least in part due to practical makeup effects.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's
Because
fair.
I'm sure it would be much easier to have already bald people taking off wigs and then putting them back on than it would be to cover hair with a bald cap and make it look like they were bald and then have them put a wig on over it. And the wigs are like coming off and on. So I'm sure there was at least some like practical.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. That definitely makes a lot of sense. I also think they're probably playing into some sort of vague, problematic stereotypes.
Oh, I agree with that too. I don't think it excuses it necessarily.
That being said, I also think if you read this movie as a trans allegory and spin it as like a positive sort of message about the trans experience, if you do, which is problematic, or not problematic at best, but like, rough, like it's a
little rough.
A little rough at best. I do think that if which these are not trans characters or actors or whatever, or these are just men that they cast to be, to put in wigs and whatever. But my thought was, it's actually rather trans affirming if you read them as trans women, and because only women can be witches.
Ah, yeah.
And they are witches, like.
So they are women.
They are women. Like, so you could almost read it as the movie. I mean, like, it's a stretch and a half. I'm not, and I don't.
But no,
think,
I see where you're going.
I don't think that was at all what the movie was going for remotely. I'm just saying that, and it's also, even that reading is problematic in the sense because they're not, they're just. I don't like it's whole layers of not
well,
great.
Yeah,
but,
and I think it also is. Because if we go off of the lore that is set up by the book, all witches are women, but they're also not women. They're witches. They're like a whole other, like it does say like all witches are women, but also
but they're not actually women.
They're not actually women.
Yeah.
They're like a completely different creature.
Yeah, and so if we only see trans characters in that context, it would imply that they're not actually women. They're like weird demon creatures, which...
Yeah.
So yes, I agree that it's... I don't know. I just thought like through like the most like cloud... I was like, maybe? Nah, I don't know. It's not anything... Good.
But it is good to look at things through these different lenses and think about it.
Yeah.
I think it stretches your brain a little bit.
Because that was my thought, was like, oh, okay, but if these were supposed to be trans characters or like cross-dressers or whatever within the universe, if that's what they were supposed to be, these characters, then the fact that they are witches and that all witches are women, you can connect those dots and be like, okay, so they are, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I was like, maybe there's something, and again, clearly not what the movie was trying to say, and what the movie is actually doing there is just trading on problematic, weird stereotypes about trans people and cross-dressers and blah, 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 and just taking all of that and slapping it into a bag of like, these people are weird, like, so it's not good. I don't know. I was just trying to like, maybe there's no.
I don't know. The whole thing is a choice, because I can see like where it might have been at least to some extent practical, because they have to be taking these wigs off and putting them back on, and they have to be bald for at least part of it. And if you start putting like wig caps and bald caps into that, you're gonna have a big mess for the makeup department.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I get that. But then at the same time, they're like trading on these weird like tropes about like these people are weird and like not right, like you were saying, and also like ugly women, maybe.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the, like, some of the characters in this scene, you could tell that they did a little more, like, dressing on to make them look more feminine.
Yeah.
And then others, they very clearly just, like, handed them a costume.
Right.
So I'm not really sure how to parse all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. The whole thing's a mess. And like I said, I think it ultimately boils down to it was just bad it's the 1990, and this is just, like you said, a combination of a practical, easy way to do have them take wigs off, combined with weird trans panic type stuff. Like that's what's going on, but trying to look at it through other lenses, I think, is at least interesting.
Yes.
At least, potentially could be interesting.
Well, like I said, it does stretch your brain to look at things through different lenses, and maybe you say, yeah, that could work, and maybe you say, nah, that doesn't really work, and that's fine. Yeah. But it's still interesting to try.
Yep. So the during that meeting, there's the moment where when Bruno turns into a mouse, it is absolutely horrifying. We get this shot of his head. It's like a puppet or something, but it's this big rubbery head, like bouncing up and down with this super thin, weird neck, and it's like a 2 second. It's like a half a second shot, and I'm sure there was more of that, and they cut it. Yeah, because I was like, holy good Lord, that was a nightmare. It was so terrifying. And also, right before they start transforming, both when Bruno and Luke transform, the first moments of them transforming, they just look like people who have, like, hemorrhagic fever. Yeah. Like, they're just, like, stark pale white, and their eyes are, like, red and, like, super, like, bloodshot. And they look like when you watch Outbreak or whatever, and like you see people dying of random hemorrhagic fevers. That's what they look like, and it's very upsetting. It's very terrifying.
Speaking of some of the effects, I thought that the mouse puppetry animatronics, I'm not sure what combination of what was used, but I thought they actually looked pretty good.
Yeah, no, it looks great.
And I mean, it is Henson, so of course they did.
Not surprising, but yeah, it does look good. During that, we talked about the sequence where Angelica Houston pushes the baby in the stroller down the cliff. There's one moment, there's this one witch that they cut to as the baby in the stroller is rolling down the hill. She yells, "Baby in a pram!" Woo! And she gets all excited, and it cracked me up so much. She just yells, "Baby in a pram!" Ooh, ooh, ooh! Like she's like very excited about this baby rolling down a hill in a stroller, and she was my favorite. It made me laugh a lot. Also, we talked about Liebchen, the cat. I love when they give house cats in movies like panther sound effects. And in this movie, Liebchen, whenever he does stuff, it's like, wow, 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 wow. Yeah. It's like, it's like classic like jungle cat sound effects. It's amazing.
In case you don't have house cats and have not spent a lot of time around house cats, they don't sound like that. They don't sound like panthers or tigers. A little bit.
They don't make those. No, they're more like, they're like whiny, annoying sounds mostly. And sometimes they hiss, but not that like crazy sound.
I noticed at the very tail end of this movie, because we don't really spend a lot of time with her, that Mrs. Jenkins is the actress who plays Mrs. Bennet in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice.
Who's Mrs. Jenkins? I don't.
Mrs. Jenkins, Bruno's mother.
Oh, I didn't put that together at all.
Yeah.
I don't remember either of them enough to have put those two things together.
I recognized her face, and I was like, I think that's Mrs. Bennet, so I went and checked. And it is obviously much younger.
Yeah.
Than
25 years before.
But it's Mrs. Bennet.
Interesting. There's a moment in the movie where it's when Luke is sneaking into the Grand High Witch's room. There's this moment where it's the real mouse, and it crawls onto this antenna on a radio, and then the antenna falls over, and the mouse is still on the antenna, has its tail wrapped around it, and then it crawls back up the antenna and drops into a bowl. very impressive mouse training. I was like, wait, what? How did they do that? Like, I was incredibly impressed that they were able to get a mouse to do that. I would wonder how many takes that took. I mean, I know you can train mice pretty effectively, like to do stuff, but I was like, because like I said, it's like this antenna falls and its tail's wrapped around it, and then it like just wild. So
Hope
wild.
that mouse got lots of cheese.
Right? So much cheese, or whatever mice actually should eat. Probably not actually cheese.
Probably not.
So, finally, last note here. The trans allegory with Bruno, I think it does kind of work based on, like, we talked about in the prequel, there was a critic who
Yeah. So if you didn't listen to the prequel, I mentioned this one academic who basically looked at the novel through a queer theory, a queer lens, and was talking about how you could read Bruno and Luke's situation, but kind of specifically more Bruno, as an allegory for coming out as trans or as,
I guess anything,
any
but specifically
of,
trans because
because of the transformation. And like look at it through as like the different ways that your family could respond to you. Like they could be very accepting, like the grandmother is, or they could have a very bad reaction, like Bruno's parents do.
Yeah, and specifically the thing that stuck out to me as potentially working in the movie is that Bruno's parents initially are like, "That's not my son. No, that's not my kid. You know, that's not. No, what are you talking about? You're crazy." Like completely just won't accept it, won't buy into it at all. And then they sort of go through this thing, and then we have Bruno talking about how he actually likes being a mouse, and then ultimately the parents kind of coming around to it and accepting that this is who they are now. And I can see why if you looked at it that way you would get that.
I think when you apply that lens to it, then that is a natural, I guess, reading of it.
My thing that we talked about is like, and in the prequel we talked about this is like, would kids get it and would it work? Would it actually mean anything to kids, or does it only mean anything to an academic assessing the film through a queer lens? You know what I mean? Like, would this actually help children sort of come to terms with their identity? I don't know.
I could see a kid reading this book and identifying with Bruno in the sense of like knowing that their parents also aren't accepting of them. Like I could see a kid reading this book and being like, "Oh, my parents are like that." But it's so vague. Like Bruno's storyline doesn't stand out to me as something that feels very clearly related to the LGBT plus experience. I don't know, like if you asked me to name kids' book characters that I thought LGBT plus kids would identify with, even if they weren't labeled or coded LGBT, Bruno Jenkins wouldn't have made that list for me.
Yeah. I will say my only pushback against that is I would say it was more noticeable and explicit than I expected it to be. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't want to say explicit because I don't know if it was intentional. It doesn't necessarily seem like it was, but it was more,
I would say probably not.
Obviously, like I was able to, like it was very like, oh yeah, I can absolutely see why somebody would read this that way, like watching the film in a way that I was expecting it to be much more of a stretch. Like I was expecting it to be way more of a stretch when we talked about it in the prequel, and then upon watching the movie I was like, oh okay, no, a lot of this tracks to me. And I think the thing that stuck out to me, and again, I've never gone through this so I don't know, but having seen other stories and read other experiences, a lot of the language that the parents used specifically felt like a very tracked one-to-one with the kind of things that parents in that situation tend to say. And that was the thing that I felt made the most, like connected the most, I guess. But I don't disagree that it still feels a little, I don't know, maybe not.
I'm having
the
a hard
analogy.
time. Yeah, I have a hard time, like, kind of verbalizing what I think about this because I don't even necessarily think that it's a stretch. I just am not sure that, like...
Well, it's what I think. It's the same. I think you're trying to say what I was saying, which is it's not that it's a stretch. It's just that I don't know if kids would get it in a way that would help in any way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I just don't
would
know.
think that maybe like going back and rereading as like an older kid or a teenager, you might
identify with,
realize like, oh man, I
Yeah.
identify with that.
Yeah.
Or hey, that's why I always identified with Bruno Jenkins.
Yeah, that's why I always liked Bruno. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't know, and I could be wrong, and I'd be interested to know if
if you had a different experience, please tell us, because I would love to hear about it.
That would be super interesting because, like I said, I think that's the thing, is that it just doesn't feel like anything that, it doesn't feel like maybe that something that you would necessarily, as a kid, like attach to and be like, yep, that's me.
That Bruno Jenkins.
But who knows?
We have one more thing to talk about.
Okay.
It's not in our notes. Because after we recorded the prequel, I told you that I wanted you to... So you had never seen this movie as a kid, and I did. I have a very distinct memory of watching a grainy VHS version of this film in my cousin Emily's den. Shout out to Emily. I know she listens to the podcast. I don't know if she's caught up with it, but shout out to Emily. And I wanted you to try to guess what part of the movie you thought scared me the most when I was a kid.
Oh, crap, that's right. Oh, man.
I want to see if you know me.
Oh, how dare you? I feel like I do, but I will say that I feel like I've forgotten enough of the movie that I might not be able to get the moment. I don't think it's anything super obvious like the witch transforming. That feels too, I don't know. I guess that could be it. Oh boy, I'm trying to know to think. I forgot to think about this while we were watching it. I wish you would have reminded me before the movie, because I feel like I would have had a better grasp of it. Because now I'm thinking back, trying to think through all the moments in the movie, and I'm not going to be able to think of all of them. I'm going to say the part that I thought was maybe the creepiest without being the most overtly like scary, which is the revelation that Erica was trapped in the painting.
You got it.
Yes.
I was so terrified of that. Like, still to this day, I think that is one of the most conceptually terrifying things I have ever encountered.
It's very creepy, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, man. I thought through everything, and I got there at the last moment. I was thinking through all the different, because I had a feeling it wasn't going to be like I said, like the overt, when she turns into an evil monster. No, because
I've always been the person who was much more scared of something that I could take and run with.
Yes.
And I'm the same way. I'm the same way. Take and run with.
I'm the exact same way. I agree completely that something like that is much scarier and much creepier than like, oh, she's a monster, like whatever. Yeah. Like, it is creepy, but I completely agree. Oh, goodness. Nailed it. All right.
You know me.
Yeah. Before we get to the final verdict, I got to do one more thing and remind you that you can do us a giant favor by heading over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us there for $2, $5, or $15 a month. Get access to different things at every level. Most recently, at the $5 and up level, we released an episode where we discussed in depth for about 2.5 hours Over the Garden Wall, starring Katie's sister Jenna, an Over the Garden Wall mega fan. And we talked through all kinds of stuff, all the details of Over the Garden Wall, how it relates to Dante's Inferno, and all kinds of fun stuff. If you want to hear that discussion, you can support us for $5 or more a month on Patreon and listen to that and all of our other bonus episodes, including next month's bonus episode, where we will be discussing the 2020 version of The Witches and doing a much shorter, kind of quick breakdown. I don't want to say much shorter because this episode wasn't particularly long, but a less in-depth breakdown of the 2020 version, how it compares to the 1990 version and the book. Very similar to how we did with the 2017 Beauty and the Beast versus the 1990 whatever Beauty and the Beast. Mm-hmm. So you get that on Patreon, and $5 or up a month, and you get access to that. Also, you can do us a giant favor by heading over to social media, any of it: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads. So follow us there. You can vote on all kinds of fun stuff. Most specifically, you can vote on whether you preferred the book or the movie, and you can leave comments and messages about which you preferred and why, or things you liked or didn't like about the movies or the books or whatever. And in our prequel episodes, we read that feedback and share it with everybody and discuss it. So please follow us on all the social media platforms and do that. Katie, it's time now for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
This one was fairly difficult for me. I really, up until I started writing the final verdict, I thought I was going to go one way.
Okay.
But then I started really mulling it over and thinking about it. The movie is a pretty faithful adaptation, all things considered. And I enjoyed a lot of the changes that the movie made, including fleshing out Erica's story, the hint at the past between the grandmother and the Grand High Witch, and giving Bruno a redeeming moment of heroics at the end of the film. And I also think that although many of the most terrifying scenes and descriptions are straight from the book, the movie has a huge advantage in being a visual medium. However, I take a lot of issue with the movies changing to the ending. Roald Dahl's properties are often discussed in terms of their quirkiness and kookiness, but what made them appealing to me as a child, aka the target audience, and I suspect that this is the case for many kids who grew up reading Dahl, is their total unflinching willingness to include and acknowledge what's bad about the world, especially from the perspective of a child. Children are sold this idea that certain adults are inherently trustworthy and are always acting in their best interests. But children know that that isn't true, and books like The Witches and Matilda and James and the Giant Peach validate that truth. The ending of the book sees Luke remain a mouse. There is no redeemed witch who has a change of heart and returns him to being a boy. The movie reaches for a milquetoast happy ending that flies in the face of the novel's ultimate message, which is that sometimes adults do harm to children that is not repairable. Damage that is foundational, that is lifelong, and that no amount of change of heart is going to fix. And I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. And for that reason, I'm giving this one to the book.
There you go. A surprise, maybe, verdict on this episode, on this Halloween special episode of This Film Is Lit. Katie, before we wrap up, what are we doing next? I already spoiled it.
You did already spoil it. But up next, we're doing something we haven't done in a long time, which is a movie currently in theaters.
Yep. But also on streaming, which is important so that I can take notes because I'm going to have so many notes.
Much more pleasant note-taking experience than the last time we did something currently in theaters, which I think was Animals or Pet Sematary.
Pet Sematary, yes.
We are talking about Dune. Mm-hmm. Or the first
half of Dune, roughly.
Of Dune.
The book.
A novel by Frank Herbert.
Yep.
And 2021 film.
Yep. Very excited about this. I've been dying. I can't wait to see the movie. I'm planning to see it twice. I want to watch it on HBO Max for the podcast so that I can take notes and stuff. But before it leaves theaters, I have to go see this in theaters. I just need to see it on the big screen. Everything I've heard, everything about it. I'm a couple hundred pages into the book, and I'm absolutely loving it so far. It is a little tedious at times with how much world building and stuff there is, and it's just a lot. It looks
very dense.
It's very dense at times, and there's just a lot, and a lot of names and that kind of stuff. You have to, anytime you're introduced to a new fantasy world, there's just that that kind of world building takes a lot of compartmentalizing and keeping track of things, which can be tough. But apart from that, I have been very much enjoying the world that is being built And like I said earlier, really enjoying the very clear inspiration that this book has strewn into the world, with so many different properties, pulling tons of stuff from this book. And so that has been really fascinating. And I've heard nothing but good things about the movie. I'm a huge fan of Denis Villeneuve, and very excited that as we're recording this, I think today or yesterday, it was announced that they greenlit the part 2. So we will not get an unfinished version. We will be able to round out the first book with the second half, with Dune part 2. Very excited about all of that. So,
and we will also be joined by
Aaron Rabinowitz of Philosophers in Space and Embrace the Void podcast. It's been a while since he's been on the podcast, but he's been on. Usually he comes on for Philip K. Dick. But Aaron, a lot of our fans will know, because we have a fair amount of crossover fans from Embrace the Void and Philosophers in Space. Specifically Philosophers in Space, because we were on that podcast, that he's a big fan of the books. He knows a lot about it, a lot more than I do, because it's very likely that I will not. I've been trying to, but with my schedule and everything going on, it's very likely that I won't completely finish the entire first book before we do the movie. I'm going to get through the end of where the movie ends, but there's a chance that I won't be done with the whole book by the time we watch the movie and record. So having him there, he's not only read the whole first book numerous times, but he's read, as far as I know, the entire series at least once, if not multiple times, and knows very much about it. So he's going to be our fountain of knowledge. And I'm not trying to put too much pressure on him here. But
and I know exactly 2 things about Dune, which is that spice is the life and sandworm dragons.
You know everything about Dune.
I know those 2 things, and I am highly excited to just sit back and be confused.
Yes, you know everything about Dune, if you know those 2 things. I'm kidding, but so that'll be a lot of fun, and that's what we're talking about in 2 weeks' time. And in 1 week's time, we got a prequel episode where we'll be previewing Dune, discussing Frank Herbert and his history in our Learning Things segment, and doing our feedback and discussion of The Witches. So in 1 week's time, come back for that. And until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, everybody else,
Keep reading books.
keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.